Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Amsterdam, starring Christian Bale, Margot Robbie, John David Washington, Chris Rock, Anya Taylor-Joy, Zoe Saldana, Mike Myers, Michael Shannon, Timothy Olyphant, Andrea Riseborough, Taylor Swift, Matthias Schoenaerts, forgive me if I said that wrong, Alessandro Nivola, Rami Malek, and Robert De Niro, directed by David O. Russell. Now, this is the one that I was most curious about when it came to reviewing, but I'm a little concerned based on the ratings on Rotten Tomatoes. But is it as bad as what they say it is? Let's get into it and find out. We open with the text telling the audience a lot of what happens in this movie actually happened, as we start in New York and the year is 1933, where we meet Burt Berenson, played by Christian Bale, as a doctor, where he fixes faces, which is something I'm not familiar with. And he goes to a house where he meets Harold Woodman, played by John David Washington, aka Denzel's kid, to perform the procedure of Meekins, as the general he worked with years ago in the war, as he was poisoned, and his daughter Liz, played by Taylor Swift, barely, as Bert, Harold, and Liz sing a song together, and Bert has 2 hours to get the autopsy done, with Milton King, played by Chris Rock, entering the picture, and they begin the autopsy with Bert and Irma St. Clair, played by Zoe Saldana, looking inside the body, which is what an autopsy usually is, where Saw 4 made it look gross. But this feels more real life, and I'm not really enjoying my time around these characters, as the acting is pretty weak, and the opening scenes were not written great, and it was problematic, but I did like the autopsy scene, as it felt real life, and the cinematography is fine, but not as impressive as I wanted it to be. Bert and Harold go to a restaurant where they try to meet Liz, and she walks out as someone is watching her and wants Liz dead, and as they talk with her, a man that pushed Liz off the road named Taryn Milfax, played by an unrecognizable Timothy Olyphant, which I'll get back to a little later, as we jump back to New York in 1918, where Bert meets with his wife Beatrice, let me see if I'm saying this right, Van den Heuvel? I don't know if I said that right, please forgive me, played by Andrea Riseborough, and her family, who sent Bert off to war. That's how Bert met and became friends with Harold, Milton, and Valerie Vose, played by Margot Robbie. Well, they didn't know that her last name was Vose until later in the film, but anyways, the point is that she is a nurse who stitches up Bert, Harold, and Milton, and she's accused of stealing bloody metal and gets a drink with Harold, while Bert's lost an eye, which is why he became a doctor, where he fixes faces. And the narration versus flashback to World War I was absolutely unnecessary, as this should have been the opening scene of the movie, in my opinion. They make up a nonsense song with 3 categories, as I got one was the red sun and the handkerchief. And there was one more that I can't remember what it was called, as they go to Amsterdam as the war is over, and go to a friend of Val's place who happens to have glass eyes, as Paul Canterbury, played by Mike Myers, and his assistant, Henry Norcross, played by Michael Shannon, and fix up Bert's eye that goes missing. And when I see Mike Myers in a dramatic role, I think 2 things. One is, what the fuck is Mike Myers doing here? And 2, is this a comedy? Because I think of him as a comedic actor. When I get to Shrek later this year, he will impress me as the voice of an ogre, and as he plays Austin Powers. But now, he's not impressing me in this role, which is a real problem from the get-go. Bert stays in Amsterdam with Harold and Val until he ends up leaving to see Beatrice back in New York, and her father says to him she's off limits, and the father was the main reason he went to war to begin with, while he wants to treat veterans to get a new place, a piece of, say, eye versus leg versus the anything missing body situation, And the father character was the worst actor slash character in this whole movie. I didn't like him at all. Val and Harold want to help Bert out in New York as they talk about it, and the next day Val leaves Harold with a note, and they never heard from her until later in the film. And as a couple of, it was very distracting, as one is Denzel's kid and one is an Australian, which I don't care about that, but as I could hear the accent, Margot Robbie's real life accent, I'll say, which didn't work for me too much. We go back to after Liz's death, as we get to Beatrice's house, as he was invited to dinner, as we learned earlier in the film, and Beatrice comes off like a bitch as she says there's no dinner and calls their relationship weak. And she helps his scars and insults him. When Harold comes out and they ask for help, and detectives Lem Getweiler, played by Matthias Schoenaerts, I don't know if I said that right, and Hiltz, played by Alessandro Nivola, and they ask about Liz's death and tried to get the evidence from a Mr. Vose. Sound familiar? Well, anyways. As they walk out of Beatrice's house and see Taryn as they warn Bert and Harold, we move on to the next scene as they get to the Vose house, and we meet his wife Libby, played by Anya Taylor-Joy, and they see Valerie, or Val as they call her, as she is Mr. Vose's sister. And Valerie talks with Bert and Harold about how Valerie told Liz to hire Bert, and Harold, after 12 years, as she wants to help them solve the mystery of who killed Liz because she doesn't trust her medicine anymore. And Carlton, the butler, knocks out Bert, and the scenes are dragging quite a bit. And this is kind of a long movie, and I felt it dragging at times. Bert wakes up, and along with Harold, meets Tom Vose, played by Oscar winner from Bohemian Rhapsody, Rami Malek. And can I be brutally honest and say, when he shows up on screen, I immediately knew he was involved in the murder of Liz, which is a predictable problem. I mean, after James Bond, come on, you got to think about it. After Bert and Harold talk with Tom, Libby, and Valerie in the picture, they see footage of a speech by General Gil Dillenbeck, played by Robert De Niro, and the film breaks like old school film does, and Tom advises Bert and Harold to meet with him, and as they leave, they want to ask if Valerie's condition is as she loses her balance and sometimes has vertigo. It's like Hereditary, that kind of thing, and these scenes are preposterous. General Gil which is what I'll call him for the rest of the movie because the movie tells me to, says no to see them as they get too many visitors a day, and they have to give him some photos when they meet the general in person while Harold is at the house with Valerie filming things, and the detectives visit Bert at the office, or his office I'll say, and they say they may need to close his office because of they need hard evidence, while Bert sees Irma and sees some red-faced men broke her wrist. And Bert makes it feel better, and next thing you know, Beatrice comes in the middle of the appointment with Irma and slaps him out of the blue, and she wants Bert to come home with her parents' approval, which seems preposterous, sure. Bert falls down in his office, and Irma walks him in to see Harold and Valerie at Milton's workshop, while Bert is worried sick about Harold. And they get to a hotel to see Paul as he gets a drink thrown at his face, literally. And they meet Harry, and these scenes should have been cut out of the movie, honestly, because it drags quite a bit. I do like the scene when Harold and Valerie see Taryn and beats his ass down, as well as his assistant. I felt the murder mystery scenes were a little more enjoyable than half of this movie. And this is when the movie kicks into gear, in my opinion, and is making me engaged, as I'm having more fun with the second half than the first half. Bert, Harold, and Valerie try to deliver the photos to General Gill's wife, and she wants them gone, but General Gill lets them upstairs while letting a McGuire, that's the guy's name, wait downstairs to talk about something that he doesn't know anything about, while he recognizes them by singing the Nonsense song from earlier in the film. And the character Robert De Niro is, in my opinion, the best character in this movie, even though he sounds the same, sure. But whatever, he was the reason I got engaged by the second half, as he stole the show, in my opinion. General Gill tells McGuire he will make a speech at the reunion gala about who killed Liz and poisoned her father, Bill, in the first place. And to tell you the truth, as they speak with Tom and Libby, and honestly, this movie has too many characters to this point, it was driving me crazy. The night comes, and who's the security to get the killer? Paul and Henry, and I was surprised this got an R rating because the language is brief. This is the scene where we get fuck into the movie, as this is R rated. But other than that autopsy scene at the beginning of the movie, this would have gotten away with a PG-13 rating, as it surprised the hell out of me. Beatrice and her family say Bert can move in with their daughter, and he says no thank you, as they say goodbye to each other forever, which is the best thing that he could have done in this whole movie, in my opinion. And General Gill meets the three men who insist the general by calling him Gill, while he wants them to call him General. And there is something off with them for sure, but they're not as bad as Tom when he reveals himself to them, and they don't have the most pleasant conversation, and the scene wasn't pleasant, but I'm still pretty engaged with this half of the movie. Tom gives General Gill some advice with Libby, and they know something seems off with them, and General Gill gives a speech on how much he hates being taken advantage of, while a sniper who happens to be Taryn tries to shoot General Gill, and Harold and Valerie sees him, and Paul and Henry have their heads up their asses, and I didn't know what the fuck they were doing at that point. As Harold and Valerie fight off Taryn and on their own and shoots Bert, and confesses Tom was involved in the murder of Bill and Liz, and everyone talks with Tom and Libby, while we get a fake-out scene with Valerie shooting Tom and making him bleed, which is something I didn't need in the movie. And I said earlier in the film, my money was on Tom as the murderer of Bill and Liz in the beginning of the movie. And I'm glad I was right at the end of the day. Valerie confesses she had a better life with Bert and Harold around her, and Tom and Libby get arrested by the detectives, and we get a narration by Bert as Harold and Valerie go to a different country where it's safer, and it's not Amsterdam, while Bert stays in New York and falls in love with Irma, and the climax was more thrilling than the first half of the movie, I would say. Now it's time for the rating. I'll give this movie a 4.6 out of 10. The acting is a little bad too, and it's a little too long, and I didn't enjoy being around these characters except for De Niro, which is not as bad as Joy, American Hustle, and I Heart Huckabees, and those were among the weakest films on David O. Russell's resume, and I felt it dragging quite a bit. The second half was making me more engaged with the movie than the first half, when Robert De Niro's character is on the screen, which was a little too late into the movie, is working tremendously, as I was having much fun with this character, and the movie has too many characters, as it was driving me crazy, and this is the weakest non-recommendation I could possibly give this movie, but it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be, and it took me 2 viewings to recognize it's kind of bad, but it's not as bad as critics say it is. So it's the best of the ones I did not care for at the end of the day. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for David O. Russell's career. And until he ever makes another movie, so long.